More than 70 police officers, either assigned to or associated with the Rampart crash unit, were implicated in some form of misconduct, making it one of the most widespread cases of documented police corruption in U.S. history. I got one for you.
Does the truth matter? Not to groups like Black Lives Matter. That's tragic for many reasons, not the least of which is that Black lives are being lost as a result. When it comes to the subject of American police, blacks, and the deadly use of force, here is what we know. A recent deadly force study by Washington State University researcher Lois James found that police officers were less likely to shoot unarmed black suspects than unarmed white or Hispanic ones in simulated threat scenarios. Harvard economics professor Roland Fryer analyzed more than 1,000 officer-involved shootings across the country. He concluded that there is zero evidence of racial bias in police shootings.
So this economics professor determined that there is zero evidence of racial bias in police shootings.
In Houston, he found that blacks were 24% less likely than whites to be shot by officers, even though the suspects were armed or violent.
Wait, is this per capita, or what kind of numbers is he presenting here? Because like if blacks are less likely to be shot by officers than white people, is it like per interaction? Like what is he talking about? Because whites are like the hyper majority and freaking like it just like these arguments without the numbers, and you know how dishonest and smarmy these people are. They're probably just looking at overall, like, well, let's just take overall numbers of shootings and then divide it racially, and then say, see, blacks are less likely, even though blacks make up only 13% of the population and white people make up 60%.
Does the truth matter? An analysis of the Washington Post's police shooting database and of federal crime statistics reveals that fully 12% of all whites and Hispanics who die of homicide are killed by cops. By contrast, only 4% of black homicide victims are killed by cops.
Right, because there's a disproportionate number of homicides where we have like gang violence and things like that, where blacks end up committing homicide against one another. But because they're the minority, like, that doesn't mean that the cops aren't disproportionately killing them. It just only means that maybe that what? This is not an argument. Come on, you can't be serious.
But isn't it a sign of bias that blacks make up 26% of police shooting victims, but only 13% of the national population?
Mention crime.
It is not.
Mention crime.
And common sense suggests why. Police shootings occur more frequently where officers confront armed or violently resisting suspects.
I knew it.
Though
blacks are significantly less likely to resist arrest, by the way, than whites.
Those suspects are disproportionately black.
Nope. Let's Google this. A new cache of data released by the Chicago Police Department, however, shows that the claim that black people are more likely to face police violence because of noncompliance is itself a dreadful myth. According to the new numbers, Chicago police officers use more force against black citizens on average than any other race, even though black citizens tended to exercise less resistance than whites. Under the same circumstances and faced with the same level of danger, cops tended to resolve the situation without firing their weapons much more often for white citizens than black citizens. The analysis was based on Chicago PD's own description of their incidents, of the incidents in questions. So they took the actual incidents as reported by the actual officers, going solely off of their words, using their data, and then came to the conclusion from these people's own data, the cops themselves that reported themselves, where they get to fabricate and lie about who's resisting or not, and then came to the conclusion, guess what? Niggas is less likely to resist and more likely to experience police brutality. Crazy.
According to the most recent study by the Department of Justice, although blacks were only about 15% of the population in the 75 largest counties in the U.S., they were charged with 62% of all robberies, 57% of murders, and 45% of assaults. In New York City, blacks commit over 3/4 of all shootings, though they are only 23% of the city's population.
I knew it was
Whites,
coming.
by contrast, commit under 2% of all shootings in the city, though they are 34% of the population.
And like 90% of the wealth.
New York's crime disparities are repeated in virtually every racially diverse city in America. The real problem facing inner-city Black communities today is not the police, but criminals. In 2014, over 6,000 Blacks were murdered, more than all white and Hispanic homicide victims combined. Who is killing them? Not the police and not white civilians, but other Blacks.
Poverty.
In fact, a police officer is 18 and a half times more likely to be killed by a Black male than an unarmed Black male is to be killed by a police officer. If the police ended all use of lethal force tomorrow, it would have a negligible impact on the Black death by homicide rate. In Chicago, through just the first 6.5 months of 2016,
I think this framing is absolutely ridiculous, because I think most of the conversation around these police homicides is not saying that this is the greatest problem facing Black Americans. Because I think the greatest problems facing Black Americans are economic, because I think the economic problems are what lead to all of the other like disparities and things that we're seeing. But we're saying that this is a problem that we are facing, and that problem that we are facing, that sense of danger, also contributes to some of the other problems when it comes to self-actualization and other people like trying to do better for themselves. When you feel that sense of oppression, you end up creating a thing called learned helplessness, where people start feeling like, man, we can't do anything, because even when we try to do things and like, you know, the system and forces work against us. This is just an incredibly dishonest framing of the issue. It's never been specifically about 100% murders, number one. It's always been about brutality and things like that. There are plenty of times where Black people encountered brutality or life-threatening situations, and they live. It doesn't make those situations any less problematic. We look at those as just as much of a detriment. So like trying to frame it just around killings is just absolutely absurd. The conversation has always been about brutality, and we have the data that absolutely displays the fact that cops on average do brutality against Black people significantly more.
over 2,300 people were shot. That's a shooting an hour during some weekends. The vast majority of the victims were Black. During this same period, the Chicago police shot 12 people, all armed and dangerous. That's 0.5% of all shootings. Does the truth matter? If it does, here's a truth worth pondering. There is no government agency more dedicated to the proposition that Black lives matter than the police.
Stop. So what about like those people in Florida who were literally using who were literally using their like mugshots? They were using mugshots like for Black people. Yeah. Florida police caught using mugshots of Black men for target practice. Black lives matter the most to these guys, right? A South Florida family is outraged at North Miami Beach police after mugshots of African American men were used as targets at a shooting range for police training. It was an ordinary Saturday morning last month when Sergeant Valerie Dient arrived at the shooting range in Medley, or so she thought. Dient, who plays clarinet with the Florida Army National Guard's 13th Army Band, and her fellow soldiers were at shooting range for their annual weapons qualifications training. What the soldiers discovered when they entered the range made them angry. Mug shots of African American men apparently used as targets by North Miami Beach police snipers who had used the range before the guardsmen. Even more startling for Dent, one of these images was her brother. It was Woody Dent's mugshot taken 15 years ago. He was arrested in connection to a drag race in 2011 that left 2 people dead. His mugshot was among the pictures of 5 minorities used as targets by North Miami Beach police, all of them riddled by bullets. It was like, why is my brother being used for target practice? Fellow guardsmen were angry too, but they tried to console Dent, who was devastated. There were like gunshots there, and I cried a couple of times. She immediately called her brother, who was 18 years old when the picture was taken. The picture actually has little like bullet holes. One is my forehead and one in my eye. I was speechless, he added. The city of Medley owns the Medley Firearm Training Center, and it leases the facilities to law enforcement agencies in the area. So, yeah, freak out of here. Don't sit here and pretend like, okay, like, and that's not the only case. There's been more than one. Bro, I don't know. It's kind of crazy.
Proactive policing revolution that began in the mid-1990s has dramatically brought down the inner city murder rate and saved tens of thousands of black lives.
This is absolutely not true. We saw a decline in murder rates all around the country, even in not in major cities, even in, I'm sorry, all around the world. You saw an insane decline in Australia during that time, literally around the world. One of the like prevailing arguments is that actually like the lead in the paint was like there was like all these like things that stopped that from being produced, and then we like ended up being able to trace it directly, or maybe not directly, trace it loosely to the fact that like once they like started creating all these like bans on like allowing lead paint in the walls and things like that, that we saw like dramatic declines in violence amongst all people, white people, black people, Hispanic people, other countries, everywhere. Like this was a problem. Also, we found out that like what's it called? All the proactive policing things were like largely ineffective. For one, they found out that blacks were significantly more likely. I don't have to go into that, but basically, like it's been decried as a freaking joke because we recognize it. Broken windows policing is just absolutely the worst. It's literally the worst.
Viability of broken windows policing has been challenged substantially, but there are admittedly some benefits. And broken windows policing has been implemented in other countries, and in other cities, and has not been found to have those same positive effects. Really doesn't speak to the strength of your argument right there.
It's never been effective. They didn't acquire more contraband. It was just like racist and oppressive.
Unfortunately, that crime decline is now in jeopardy. As I write in my book, The War on Cops, police officers are backing off of proactive policing in black neighborhoods thanks to the false narrative that police officers are infected with homicidal bias.
So like there's like this Ramparts division that was like found, and they literally turned that entire Ramparts division police. The Rampart Scandal involved widespread police corruption and community resource against street hoodlums, anti-gang unit of the Los Angeles Police Department's Rampart Division in the late 90s. More than 70 police officers, either assigned to or associated with the Rampart crash unit, were implicated in some form of misconduct, making it one of the most widespread cases of documented police corruption in U.S. history, responsible for a long list of offenses including unprovoked shootings, unprovoked beatings, planting of false evidence, stealing and dealing narcotics, bank robbery, perjury, and the covering up of evidence of these activities. The Rampart investigation, based mainly on a statement of admitted corrupt crash officer Rafael Perez, initially implicated over 70 officers in wrongdoing. Of those officers, enough evidence was found to bring 58 before an internal administrative board. However, only 24 were actually found to have committed any wrongdoing, with 12 given suspensions of various lengths, 7 forced into resignation or retirement, and 5 terminated. As a result of this probe into falsified evidence and police perjury, 106 prior criminal convictions were overturned. The scandal resulted in more than 140 civil lawsuits against the city of Los Angeles, California, costing the city an estimated $125 million in settlements. Partly as a result of the scandal, Mayor James did not rehire Police Chief Bernard Parks in 2002. Both the scandal and the de facto firing of Parks are believed to have precipitated Hahn's defeat by Antonio Villa, I don't know how to pronounce that, in the 2005 mayoral election. As of 2020, the full extent of Rampart corruption is not known, and several rape, homicide, and robbery investigations involving Rampart officers remain unsolved. Yeah. There was some homicidal bias in those police officers. Who? Letitia, what's her name? Letitia James sues police. Attorney General James, filed a lawsuit against the NYPD for excessive use of force. In the complaint, Attorney General James outlines the NYPD's illegal and harmful conduct against New Yorkers during recent racial justice protests for years prior, which has led to significant injuries and violated individual basic rights to peacefully protest. The lawsuit specifically charges the NYPD, the City of New York, Mayor Bill, Commissioner with failing to address the long-standing pattern of abuse by not properly training, supervising, and disciplining officers to prevent misconduct, despite knowledge and public admission that it's violated the rights of New Yorkers. They were specifically doing racist stuff, specifically when it came to the race stuff. It was kind of absurd. These things have happened. Following the killing of George Floyd, the thousands of protesters to the street, the killing of black people killed. After several evening violent clashes between the NYPD and protesters, Governor Avenue Cuomo called the Office of the Attorney General to conduct a civil investigation into police misconduct during these incidents. Since May 30, the OAG received more than 1,300 complaints and pieces of evidence through a dedicated online portal and phone and email hotlines. Attorney General James also held a 3-day public hearing with testimony from more than 100 protesters, community-based organizations, elected officials, and NYPD Commissioner Shea. In addition to the public testimony, the OAG received more than 300 submissions of written testimony. Yeah. So, no homicidal bias?
As a result, violent crime is going up. In cities with large black populations, homicides in 2015 rose anywhere from 54% in Washington, D.C. to 90% in Cleveland. Overall, in the nation's 56 largest cities, homicides in 2015 rose 17%, a nearly unprecedented one-year spike. Many law-abiding residents of high-crime areas beg the police to maintain order, precisely the type of policing that the ACLU, progressive politicians, and the Obama Justice Department denounce as racist.
It's never been about asking for more policing. They're just asking for more economic help. They're asking for after-school programs. They've always done this. This has always been this has always been like what blacks have asked for and people in the inner cities have. And they just specifically have always just given us more policing, which is literally the last thing that we want. And it's not even community policing in any capacity.
This is tragic because when the police refrain from proactive policing, black lives are lost. Lost because of a myth. The best research and data reach this conclusion. There is no evidence that police are killing blacks just because they're black. You now have the truth.
Well, sure, maybe not just because they're black, but they're killing them because they're black and they are racist. Because the police officers are racist, or because they have black bias. You would have to show me something like we're in the Alton Sterling case, where it's like you have to make me believe in some sort of way that this officer would have killed him just the same had he been white, and I just don't think you can convince me of that. Like these videos are literally designed just for echo chamber nonsense. I bet you in the comments people are going to say all and like be hard body agreeing. Yep, this is crazy. Jesus, this is so hurtful. I hate. PragerU is Satan, bro. It's so gross.